Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Tony here. I'm going to try to make this as quick and painless as possible in explaining to you why there is no such thing as white privilege, why white privilege is an absolute myth. Now, the first thing is that there's a lot of white people out there who believe that because of white privilege, they should walk around feeling guilty about being white, which makes absolutely no sense. I mean, that in and of itself is racist. And then there's a bunch of black people out there who will say, well, because of white privilege, we can't succeed, we can't do what we have to. And they're basically using that as an excuse to be lazy and not make something of themselves. And I just want to say that both of those people are dead wrong. White privilege is a myth. And I have two main reasons why I know for a fact that white privilege is false. The first thing is that minorities have been able to succeed in this country long before integration and affirmative action and any other attempts on the government's part to try to legislate the races getting along with each other. You had, for example, take the Native American community in North Carolina known as the Lumbee. They are a mixture of a bunch of different Native American tribes that came together, and then those tribes themselves mixed with white and black. And so they're more of a tri-racial group that has for decades tried to get federal recognition, and they have failed to do so. They have state recognition, but the long story short is they're not white. They're a bunch of Native Americans living in North Carolina who have been able, a lot of them, to succeed, hold down jobs, preserve their culture, and survive perfectly fine without the sympathy of the white man. And when you think about it, that just goes to show that it's not sympathy that lifts up a people, it's hard work. It's actually raising your kids and being there for your family. And so, I mean, you look at examples in black culture. How about Rosewood, Florida? That's an area where it was a black city, it was a black town in Florida where they had their own jobs, their own communities, their own businesses. They were able to survive without integration, without the white man's sympathy, without anything of that nature. And so that just goes to show that you had not just Rosewood, but you had communities like that, whether they be black, whether they be Native American, even Asian-run businesses in this country that existed before integration, and they did just fine. And so if that's the case, then what is all this white privilege about? If you had communities that were perfectly able to survive without sympathy from the government or white people taking pity on them. In fact, when you have these white people going around saying, because of my white privilege, I just need to understand that I have things that black people and Indians and Asians don't. How? I had a coworker. She got fired, thank God. But this coworker looked at me and said, I've got white privilege. And I just looked at her and said, I'm Native American. You're white. Yeah, I have the same job you do. We are equals as far as this is concerned. And I had to apply for my job the same way you did. And we both got the job. I am in no way inferior to you. I was able to go to school and read and pick up a book and do what I had to do to get the job. And that's what you did. And so I looked at her, I said, I am no less than you are, despite the fact that I'm Indian and you're white. And she had no response for it. But that's because it's just sort of a lazy cop-out argument. And I actually think it's racist against white people because then they walk around feeling guilty for being white, thinking that, I have to spend the rest of my life apologizing to minorities because they're not able to have the things that I have. That's just a bold-faced lie, and it's a racist one too. And so instead of there being racism against non-white people, now they're trying to turn it around and make it racist against white people, and that's just not fair. A black person or a Native American or a white person, none of them could help the fact of what their ethnicity is. And so why try to make them feel guilty for their ethnicity? That doesn't make any sense. You can choose your lifestyle. You can choose what kind of person you become in this world. But the one thing you cannot choose is the color of your skin. Also, you can't choose your gender, and don't let any idiot fool you about that. But I digress. The fact of the matter is that you shouldn't make white people walk around feeling guilty just for the fact that they are white. Because just as much as you think that, minorities were so oppressed in history, white people were oppressed too. And that's the second point that I'm going to make, is that white people aren't as privileged as you think they are. Because, as a matter of fact, In Britain, before the slave trade, you had white people oppressing other white people. In fact, even during the time of the African slave trade, the British were racist against the Irish and kept them as slaves. And, in history class, they'll teach you white people were brought over here as indentured servants, but then eventually given their freedom. But black people stayed on the plantation because they're black and we need to pity them. If you actually look at the real history, a lot of those white indentured servants were never given their freedom and stayed on the plantation as slaves alongside the black slaves. And that's why you have a lot of diversity within descendants of the slaves on the plantation, is because they were an admixture of the Europeans that were forced to stay on the plantation as slaves and the Africans that mixed with them. Not to mention you had a lot of Native Americans who did not want to be forced westward and did stay on the plantation alongside the white slave and alongside the black slave. So the plantation itself has always been a very diverse place in American history. So you have a lot of white people that are poor peasants, poor farmers, or like these coal miners out in West Virginia, where the only job they can find gives them black lung and they have a lot of health problems. You have a lot of white people who descend from generations and generations of poverty. So don't believe this myth that white people just have all lived in this castle protected from all the evil in the world, and that black people are the only ones and Native Americans are the only ones that ever had to go through anything. Every race has had to go through something, but every race has been able to lift itself up by hard work, because the Bible says, in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Doesn't matter what your skin color is. If your people reject God, they start fornicating around, they start drinking the alcohol, they start abandoning their children, that race is going to crumble. It doesn't matter how white or black or whatever in between that race is. I mean, take my family as an example. My family is not perfect. I have ancestors that were drunks. I have ancestors that were derelicts, and we inherited the curses of that. But you look at the times where I had non-white ancestors who were able to succeed. To make a long story short, my grandmother's side of the family is mixed between white and Native American, but they had so much Native American in them that in the Jim Crow South, they were not allowed to be considered white. But despite that, they worked hard. My great-grandfather worked hard. He made a living for himself and for his family. They had a nice house. They ended up actually living in the white neighborhood and going to the white section, white restaurants during segregation. But the fact is that they were not legally accepted as white because they had so much Native American in them. But despite that, they were actually able to succeed, and they did not need the help from the government. In fact, when you look at these nations that accept help from the government, it makes it worse. I mean, who's doing better? The black family where the man went out and got a job and did what he had to do and raised his family, or the black family on food stamps? Which one is the father usually in the picture? Let's be honest here. The Native American that did not live on the res and made a living for himself, or the Native American that lived on the res and is in poverty and everyone around them is a drunkard and their houses are falling apart? Think about that. And in actuality, tribal recognition from the federal government hurts Native Americans, not helps them. And as a matter of fact, welfare and affirmative action hurts black people, not helps them. Think about this. If anything, whites are non-privileged in this country. Because of affirmative action, it's harder for a white man to get that same job that the black man will get because of the color of his skin. So at the end of the day, none of us is privileged except these super wealthy people who inherit millions and billions of dollars from their family and learn to treat other people like scum. I'm not saying every rich person is evil, but the Bible does say it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. So a lot of these rich people, these super wealthy people who secretly bribe congressmen and run our government, those are the real privileged people. In actuality, it's rich privilege, not white privilege. Now, think about this. If white people are 70% of the U.S. population, roughly, and 1% of the country owns 99% of the wealth, doesn't that statistically mean that most white people are poor, if you stop and think about that? So all these minorities that want to treat themselves like victims, don't treat yourself like a victim. Don't sell yourself short. Work hard and build your life and build your family's life. And all you white people thinking you're helping black people and Native Americans by having all sort of sympathy for them, you're not. Hold them accountable. Hold yourself accountable. Let's everyone just work hard and do what we have to do to succeed.